for yet another in our little series of That Remote Life. If you're joining us, you can just send a little wave to let us know that you're here as you come along. And as always, you can drop your questions, your messages, and your comments in the chat box, and we will acknowledge them throughout the conversation. Okay, just testing that we are in fact live. We should be. Yes, so it is showing us as live. All right, so without delay, Deborah, we will just continue, and then as people come along, they will give us a wave and they will ask their questions and we will respond accordingly. So good evening, everyone who is tuning in. The name is Shanoy. I'm a development communications practitioner and also someone who has enjoyed working remotely for a number of years. That's what has inspired and motivated me to do this That Remote Life series, to pretty much speak to different persons who are working within the space and to share diverse topics in terms of motivating people to make the best of the opportunities that come with being working remotely, and also in terms of how to achieve balance while working in this particular way. And so today we have with us Deborah Love Bradshaw, a lady who wears many hats. I said to her before, I said, Deborah, what exactly do you want me to refer to you by? She's an author. She has shared her point of views before on the TEDx stage. She is a motivational speaker. She's a cultural communications coach and so much more, which I'm sure she will share a little bit more about herself with you as we go along. But those are just some of the hats that she wears. So without further ado, I would just ask you, Deborah, to just tell us a bit about yourself. Who is Deborah Love Bradshaw?
Deborah Love Bradshaw is a mother of two absolutely amazing sons, one of which has Down syndrome. And what he has taught me is that we all have value and we all have a purpose. And so everything I do in life revolves around the fact that I believe that each and every one of us is valuable. And so my goal in life is to encourage people and to help them communicate more effectively so that they can fulfill their purpose.
Okay, sounds great. So quite a bit to goal setting and helping people to fulfill their purpose. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit, Deborah, in terms of, what drove you in this direction, in terms of where you are now, inspiring, motivating people. Is this something that you just always started doing, or was there a process that took you to this particular point?
I think the answer is both, if that makes any sense.
Yes.
So as a child, I moved to Southeast Asia when I was 6 years old. And there is a photo I have of me just a short time later there. And I was so full of curiosity and so just grabbing onto the world. And then I went through a period of time when I really got discouraged and I went through some really difficult challenges, personal challenges, things that happened to me, some physical challenges. I became very ill. I was in a very bad car accident. So many things happened. And I spent several years there just being discouraged and wondering, is this all there is to life? And when I just started on the mend, I found out I was pregnant.
Mm-hmm.
And 12 weeks into the pregnancy, I found out my son would have Down syndrome. So I had a choice to make. One, I was asked if I wanted to keep the pregnancy, but two, I had a choice to make for the rest of my life about what my attitude would be. I had a choice to make about whether I was willing to look at someone else's world. I was willing to look at another perception, whether I was willing to look at another culture and accept that culture as part of my own. And so as you know from meeting my son online a moment ago, my answer was yes.
Yes.
That started me on a journey to just seeing what people are capable of, which is so amazing if they're given
Hmm.
the opportunity. If people believe in themselves, if people are given the tools, such as how to communicate with someone from a different culture, the things that they need to know about how do I baby step my way into
Hmm.
another life, then anything is possible. And so I just love helping people figure out how to better communicate and how to better connect. People call me a connector. And recently, people have started calling me a hope dealer during this particular time.
A
And I'm
what? A hope healer?
a hope dealer. And
Hope
I think I'm
healer.
going to
Okay.
keep that title.
Yes, that's an interesting title indeed. And you probably just tell us exactly what a hope dealer does.
A hope dealer enables other people to see the hope in spite of the situation.
Okay. And so that title in particular, Deborah, is very timely. I mean, I say to people all the time, if someone had said to me a month ago that we would be in the place where we are now, I would have thought it was very far fetched.
Yeah, no
I
way.
would have thought it was almost impossible what they're talking about. But it's this happened. We're where we are now.
Hmm.
And there is still a sense of panic and anxiety for many people being thrown into this space. So I wanted to go into a bit of encouragement for people who have just been thrown into this. They feel like it's the end of the road for them. They kind of just don't know how to deal with what's happening. And it just in terms of some reminder to be hopeful, as you mentioned. So what are some of the things you would say to some of those people?
Well, I would say that first of all, your feelings are legitimate. It's okay to feel like that. It's the same way I felt when I found out that my son would have Down syndrome. I was fearful. And I had to look at my options. I had to say, what can I do now? And that's the same thing where people are now. It's okay to be fearful for that moment, but you have to tell yourself, okay, I was fearful. Now you have to get up and do something different. And
Yes.
so it's time to change our perspective. As much as everything stinks about losing jobs, about not being able to communicate with family, about doing all of those things, there's also so many opportunities during this period of time.
Yes.
There's an opportunity to sit back and reflect, what do I want to do in life? There's an opportunity to think, what would my best life look like? There's an
Yes.
opportunity to reconnect with people that we haven't had the time to reconnect with because we have been so busy. I,
Yes.
there's so many opportunities in this, and it's really about what you focus on. If you focus on the newscasts and you focus on the fear and you focus on the bad things that are happening, that is where your brain will go. We have something in our brains called the reticular activating system, or RAS. And that reticular activating system, we can focus it. We tell our brain what we want it to see. The
Yeah.
reticular activating system is our brain's way of categorizing things, because we have so much information coming in. And if you thought there was a lot of information before the pandemic, now there is 10 times more information. And
Hmm.
so this system in our brain helps keep us on track of what we want to notice. So we have to make a choice. We have
Yes.
to make a choice what our focus is going to be on. If you tell your brain, I want to focus on the good, then the good will start coming your way. Um,
Yeah.
Let me explain it like this. If you are going to purchase a car and you go out and you say, oh, I want a red Kia, all of a sudden, before you purchase the car, you are all of a sudden going to see a million red Kias on the
Oh,
road. Maybe not quite
indeed.
a million,
Indeed.
but you are going to see all of these things that you've never seen before. It's the same way in this situation. Do I want to see the problems? Are there problems? Absolutely. I am not denying that in the least. Or do I want to see the solution? If I
Yes.
want to see the solution, my brain will come up with ways to provide that solution. I will hear something and it'll spark an imagination or an idea or creativity within me to help me get out of the situation. What do you want your focus to be on? You decide.
Sounds great. And so, when you said that, Deborah, I'm a strong believer in vision boards and manifesting the kind of life you want. So, when
Yeah.
you said that, it connected with me. And, but outside of a vision board, what are some of the basic tips, people could use to get into this frame of mind you're talking about, choosing to focus on the positives or being selective in terms of what they focus on? I mean, it sounds easy to you and I would have practiced some level of visualizing and manifesting, but for the person who doesn't even know where to start, how can they kind of condition themselves to get into this positive mind frame?
First, decide 5 things that you would like the world to look like.
Nice.
What would you like what your situation to be? Would you like to have a job? Would you like to be running your own business? Would you like to be spending time with your family? What would you like? You have to decide, what do you want? And so my suggestion is to pick 5 things that you would want. Second is to create a routine even in the middle of this time. Our brains are looking for order. That's part of the reticular activating system. Our brains are looking for the ability to be able to find some logic, some pattern in all of this. And so you don't have to have the same routine that you had before the pandemic by any way, shape, or form. But if you start to create little things that are the routines, what do you do when you get up in the morning? What's the first thing you do? What's the second thing you do? I love Hal Elrod's The Miracle Morning, and he has a system called Savers. I suggest that you check it out. It might be the right suggestion for you. But figure out, what are you going to do at night before you go to bed? What are you going to do in the morning? And then choose several things during the day that you are going to accomplish.
Nice.
Um, at the end of the day, after you've decided what you're going to accomplish, focus on what you accomplished, not what you didn't accomplish. Sometimes I'll make a to-do list and I'll have 12 things that I want to do. And I will get done 7 of those. And instead of celebrating my 7, I lament my 5.
Ah,
And so we have to say, every night, my ritual is to name 5 things that I'm incredibly grateful for that day. And they can be simple things. Like after this call, my son and I are going to have a dance party with some friends online.
nice.
They set up the music, and we are going to have fun at home on Zoom. So that's one way to do it. But have 5 things every day that you're grateful for. And then write down 5 things that you accomplished. Accomplishing something can be as simple as washing your dishes. It can be as simple as remembering to tell somebody you love them. Or it can be, hey, I actually got chapter 1 of my book done that I've always wanted to write. We all have a book, right? That
Yeah.
we want to write. And so doing those things that will remind you that, yes, I did get something done today. And so that helps tremendously. Um, Making to-do lists, as we talked about, examining, what lies am I telling myself? What am I telling myself that's really not true? If I'm telling myself this pandemic will never be over, well, that's no more true than life will always be what it always was. Neither one is correct. We have to examine, what lies are we telling ourselves, and decide that we will not accept those lies anymore. I would also challenge us to decide what brings you joy. And so for me and my son, it's dance parties. It could be reading a book for you. It could be having dinner with your family. It could be laughing, or it could be anything. But what brings you joy? And try to incorporate one little tiny thing each day that brings you joy.
Sounds great, Deborah. And I like that you took that angle because, and I'm just thinking in terms of in the spirit of alignment. Today, I made a post about how important it was to not be so overwhelmed and pressured with all that's happening now. Because I've tended to see posts online saying, oh, if you don't use this time to be creative, if you're not using this time to launch a project you wanted to do, if you're not using this time to achieve all of your goals and dreams. And I found that personally, people react to different things in different ways. For
Absolutely.
me, I reduce my anxieties by throwing myself into things such as this interview that helps me to get over it or helps me to not be as anxious. But for some people, it may simply be the fact that they wake up and they're in their right mind, or they can say, I at least remember to feed myself today, or I remember to go for a walk. So I just wanted you to talk a little bit about, especially with what's happening now, how people can kind of block out some of the pressure that they probably are putting on themselves, or even people online are putting on them in terms of their own values or what they feel that they need to be achieving at this particular point in time.
Absolutely. And that sort of brings us to our topic of what we were going to also speak about today, which is culture. Everyone has a different culture, everyone has a different mindset. And so those beliefs are ingrained within us, and what someone else says doesn't necessarily ring true for us.
Yes.
So we have to decide, is what they're saying true? Not only are we examining our own limiting beliefs, we're examining what other people are saying. And there's so much noise in the space right now. There's so much pressure. But I heard a speaker the other day, because I am a content consumer, and my number one strength, if you do the 20 strengths test, is lifelong learner. I love to learn. Um, but he said something that really hit me. And sometimes I can be such a workaholic. Sometimes I'm just like, I've just got to drive. I've just got to get this done. I've just got to. And I forget that I'm the most creative when I stop. I find the joy. I do something that's fun. And then the creativity happens. So I would say, take a breath, take a break. Even if you are doing things that you feel are accomplishing amazing things during this time, don't forget that it's okay to do you. It's okay to do it your way and the way that's appropriate for you and your family and your culture.
Yes. I like that. I truly like that because, as I mentioned, there's just all this pressure, and then people are not sure in terms of what to do. All right. And then, so even for people as well, Deborah, so this, I will vary a little bit in terms of, how to navigate change and how to be dealing with that sort of change. Because what we're seeing is that more than any other point before is that there's been a rapid shift to unemployment, and at the same time more and more people are looking for the opportunities to work online and to work remotely. But many of them will also tell you, I am technologically incompetent, I don't know the basics and that sort of stuff. And we had several speakers on this week who spoke about things that they can do, but what I wanted to ask you about specifically was can people cultivate this dealing with this change. It's something you did not plan for. You were preferred to be in your office, for example. Your workplace is now saying to you, all our processes are being moved online. You haven't had adequate time to get familiar with the processes. So I wanted to talk a bit in terms of change management and how to adjust with all that's happening around you.
Absolutely. And the thing is that change is inevitable. It happens to us on a daily basis, but we
Yes.
usually do not experience the drastic changes we have in such a short period of time. It's not, people say, well, I don't like change. Well, yes, you do. You want to eat something for dinner, you want to watch something different on TV. We do enjoy change. We do enjoy seeing different friends. We get tired of routine, but when it's thrown at us, it can be overwhelming.
Yes.
And so we have to give ourselves again that break, and we have to baby step our way there. You don't know how to do it. Yesterday, I did a webinar on how to look better on camera. I'm still learning, so no judgment here. But a lot of people are having to telecommute, and they've never used this kind of platform before. So, what can you do to connect, to use appropriate body language, to be able to communicate with someone virtually? And so
Yes.
I had three things that you we're supposed to do. First was lean in. Just accept that change is happening. The more willing we are to say, okay, this is happening. There's nothing I can do about my circumstances. The only thing I can control is my attitude, is the better we are going to adjust to change. Number two, if we learn where you are. Go ahead and step in. I can't remember the L word I used yesterday, and I don't have those notes in front of me, but step in exactly where you are. Go ahead and launch, I think was the word that I used. Go ahead and step into the space. We don't know what we're doing. There has been no better time than the present to practice. Everyone is so forgiving. Everyone is so full of grace. And there are so many courses available online on the specific thing that you want to learn. But
Yeah.
choose one thing that you want to learn. Don't try to learn
Do
1 million.
everything. Yes.
Pick one thing. Pick, how do I get on a Zoom call? Or how do I get on a GoToMeeting call? Or how do I use this platform? Or whatever it is that you need to do that day. And then the last thing is learn while you go. Go ahead and start and just realize you're going to learn as you go. And that change is something that happens in our lives. It's here. We can't do anything about it. Again, we can only choose how we react to it.
Great, sounds good. And so you touched a bit in terms of lots of what we want to talk about in terms of you spent a little bit on culture, but you mentioned something just now about communication, you know, the nonverbal cues, and I just wanted to touch a little bit on that. In terms of now, more and more people, you don't have the benefit of seeing your coworker in front of you. You don't have the benefit of clarifying some things in person. You now have either a phone call, a video call, or all extended things. There's some sort of separation there. And so in terms of navigating that space, I wanted to know if you had any tips that people could kind of follow when they're faced with the challenge that they're not able to have that in-person element.
Absolutely. First of all, know that there's two things about communication, and it's going to sound backwards, but it's not. Two, there are um, things that are always going to be perception issues.
Mhm.
So we as humans sometimes get our feelings hurt. We sometimes say things that we shouldn't. We sometimes don't understand somebody else's perception. But if we begin with the ability and the intention to give each other grace, if we begin with the desire to learn about the other person, if we begin with the opportunity to see this as a learning experience, then this is a perfect time to practice
Yeah.
uh, learning to communicate.
Okay,
And
sounds.
yeah,
Sorry, I didn't know if you were finished. I felt I cut in just a bit.
that's okay. Go for it.
Okay. All right. And then on the matter of culture now, Deborah, because all throughout this week, we've been talking a lot about how people can go into e-commerce, how you can move your business online, how you can be interacting with people across different time zones, how you can set up a Fiverr account and offer to be an administrator for someone who is in a completely different country, how you can hop on and offer to be an English language, practice your language with someone who's in a different space. And we wanted to touch a bit in terms of cultural considerations. How is it that we can navigate working with other cultures remotely?
So know that there are certain standards
Mhm.
that um, different countries have, and they tend to be high context or low context cultures. I'll tell you a little bit more about that in just a minute. When I teach, I typically teach for several hours or several days. So cutting it down
Yes.
and oh boy, how do I do this? But know that we are becoming more of a global society. More than ever before in the world's history, we are becoming a global society. And communicating with each other is easier. And in some ways, it's harder because we're doing it virtually. And so you cannot see, you see my shoulders and up, and you see my facial expressions, but you don't see my hands. You don't see what my feet are doing. And so we have to ask for clarity. We have to be willing to step in there and talk to people about
Mhm.
what is it you mean? We have to think about where we have to be proactive. We have to
Yes.
think about where are they from. We have to think about what might their culture be, and we have to listen for cues and clues of those parameters.
Yes, that's true.
There are, is this? There are so many pieces to culture. Is someone individually focused or are they group focused? Low context cultures tend to be more individualistic. High context cultures tend to be more group oriented. And there's so many factors that can make up all of the different ways we communicate. Someone is typically not one culture or the other anymore. They are a mixture of all the pieces.
Okay.
So I didn't know whether you had a question or whether you want me to go on.
No, 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 that's fine. But in terms of cultures, and then, because this is something I'm passionate about and something I've studied as well.
You
But in
know it.
terms of culture, I just wanted our viewers to know that we weren't necessarily just even speaking about people being from different countries,
No,
because even within an organization, our own backgrounds. So I wanted you to just kind of expound a bit in terms of when you talk about culture, the many different dimensions that are involved, because people tend to equate culture with the countries that you're from.
true. Absolutely. So I actually talk about three main types of culture when I
Yes.
give my presentation. So I talk about cultural communication and communicating with people who you may live in the same city, but if someone's family is from a particular part of the world and your family is from another part of the world, you're going to have different cultures.
Yes.
Uh, I also talk about generational cultures as we shift and change in our society. Someone who is a baby boomer is going to be very different than somebody who's a Generation Z.
Hmm.
Their perspective on life, the things that are important to them, the things that they are striving for, and how they handle a work-life balance is very different. And then third, I teach on corporate culture. How do you create an effective culture where everyone can get the most done and be the most effective within the space and the industry that you're working in? So, culture means so many different things. Culture is your beliefs, culture is your system of engagement, culture is your food preferences and what music you listen to.
Yes.
Culture, all of those pieces. So, as individual as snowflakes or fingerprints are, so is culture.
Great. And I like that you broke out all of this in that way, Deborah, because I find even within organizations, it's sometimes taken for granted that, oh, we're all working. So it may not be that you're consulting with someone who's from a different country. You may be consulting with someone who's from your own country, but there are also certain cultural considerations there. And as I like that you went into the generational cultural differences, the organizational cultural differences. But I wanted you to talk a little bit as well about in terms of personality and how that may even affect some of the differences that people experience when working remotely together.
Absolutely. There are, I don't know, I do a lot of studies and like surveys and tips online. I take them myself just to see where I'm at. And I am someone who's very empathetic and I am someone who expresses my feelings. But I have a lot of friends who are engineers or who a friend and I the other day got into sort of a discussion, a little bit of a spat because she is very much say it like you mean it. Uh, say what you mean what you say. And she could
Yes.
be very cut and dried in her speech. And I tend to be more cautious. Neither one is right or wrong. It's just different in the way we react. So we have to realize that when someone else has a different way of communicating. It's not wrong. It's
Yes.
just coming from their perspective and their difference. That's how their brain works. Some people are analytical. Some people are very empathetic. Some people are connectors. Some people, everyone has a different way that they connect. You can quote Myers-Briggs, you can quote the 5 steps, you can quote all of these different things. And all those things are is they tell us a little piece of our personality.
Yes.
But here's the thing. I don't care whether somebody has as different a personality from me as the man in the moon, as the expression used to go. I'm showing my age now. Um, but we all have things that connect us. We all have things that we have in common. We all love our families. We all hope the best for others around us in our social circles. We all
Yes.
want to move forward in our lives. We all want to have certain kinds of creature comforts. And those types of connections are where we begin, and then we work out our differences from there.
Sounds great. And so, just to make it a little bit more relatable to the people who have been following or that remote life series as well, just the concepts you've been expressing, they're relatable to every industry. See, if you're doing an online tutoring, if you're an educator, if it
Absolutely.
is that you worked with a company before and your company has now shifted operations online, if
Mhm.
you're a freelancer and you're seeking to work with someone else as well, there's always the opportunity for having differences that are based on our differences. Right.
Exactly.
So I like that you mentioned in terms of acknowledging that as a start. And so, having acknowledged some of the differences, what are some of the ways that you could say people can become a little bit more sensitive and to kind of navigate that curve and kind of work around the differences from a cultural perspective?
Well, I've made a list of several things that I think are some of the most important factors when determining how you should work with someone, and that's from wherever they are in the world. But things like, is this person more group focused or is this person more individually focused?
Yeah.
That interacts differently with how you respond. If they are group focused and they are working on how do I work within the group, then you need to keep that in mind as part of your goal. If they're more individual focused and they're working towards their individual goal and implementation, that is going to change your focus. You really have to examine what do they want? What is their why? What is their reason for hiring you? What is their reason for connecting with you? And
Mhm.
then time. Time is a huge factor. In some countries, if you show up on time, you're considered rude. In other countries, if you show up late, you're considered rude. So you
Yeah.
have to sort of figure out where is that person coming from and find a middle ground. Some of the other things are, besides time concepts, Americans are typically known, and this is definitely a generalization. So I'm just using, please know that multiple cultures here, uh,
Yes.
but there are people who, you meet them and they're your friend. But then there are other cultures that they want to establish a relationship first. They want to take time to get to know you. But once you're accepted into that friend circle, then you're there forever. So how does that relate to what we're talking about? So when you're building business with someone who's an American who has that mindset of, oh, everybody's my friend and I make friends easily.
Silly. Yes.
And they run up against somebody who says, oh, this is a business relationship and let me get to know you first, might have a little bit of an issue if they don't understand that there is a different perception.
Yes. That's quite true because I mean, even in my own space and having studied in a very multicultural space, I found that my friends were spread across different countries. And so you kind of take it for granted sometimes that you start off being friends, so it's easier to navigate those challenges, but it isn't. So even something you may take for granted as planning an activity together to say, okay, we're all going to, well, we can't move much now, but if we said, all right, we're all going to go shopping, And by virtue of having that conversation, one set of persons assume that we're all going to go shopping at once, whereas
Yeah.
someone else just interpreted it to mean like, oh, we had this discussion, but I'm going to go now and you guys are free to go whenever.
Yeah.
So even
Exactly.
things like those can create some challenges. We have a question coming in here, Deborah. Let me just bring this up here. I'm a tutor. I'm both a classroom and online tutor or freelancer tutor trying to expand my business. Any tips in regards to culture?
Absolutely. So you have to determine, is this person group focused or individual focused? Are they concerned about making themselves better or are they concerned about making the group culture better? What time works for them? If they say, uh, we're going to meet at 12 o'clock, does that really mean I'm going to be there at 10 to 12 and please be there also? Or does that mean I'm going to be there at 20 after and I expect you to accommodate me? That can be very confusing and that can be difficult in this period of time. Is that person more family oriented or more task and work oriented? If something comes up in the family, are they going to fulfill that agreement or are they going to say, oh, sorry, I had to take care of my children? So keeping those things in mind. And Shanoy, I know that you actually would have some wonderful tips as well. This is
Yes.
your too. So please, let's hear from you.
Yeah. So in terms of the online class or tutoring, as you mentioned, because we spoke to a earlier in the week, we spoke to a online tutor and homeschooling personal as well. And
Mhm.
it ties into lots of the tips that you've been offering in terms of acknowledge that even the persons that you're teaching, there's no one size fits all. You
Yeah.
know, it's we're humans, we're very unique. We each have our own unique backgrounds and experiences. And I remember one example that the person was given was that you may have a student who prefers, if you're teaching multiple subjects, they may prefer to do math first because they're stronger at it, or they may prefer to do languages first. So it's about getting into the space of identifying these differences and how to navigate them and how to deal with them. So I hope, T. Stevens, that kind of answers your questions in terms of culture. It's about first recognizing the differences you're dealing with, and then also working along with the person in terms of how best to deal with their differences in background, personalities, learning styles, etc. All the many things Deborah had spoken about before. And then maybe even when you're doing your group work as well, you know, just try to encourage people to be sensitive to each other's needs and to just be kind. Start off just being kind and polite, and then that goes a super long way in terms of helping us to deal with these differences. And so the next question I'll ask Deborah will probably expand a little bit more on this, because of course those in the cultural communications or intercultural communication space knows that communication is the heart and center of this. So I know we have said it, and I know because we've built that rapport and we understand what we're talking about. But for the people who are listening, Deborah, just take us through, how does communication factor into all of this? So we're having all of these challenges, personalities, culture clashes, different backgrounds, different countries, etc. How can we really use communication to help within in these scenarios?
Well, so a couple of thoughts come to mind, and the first thing you have to do is be willing to learn and listen.
Yes.
You have to be willing to say, what are they interested in? Who are they as an individual? And how do I best help that person? If you are in business, then your goal is to help that person. So though sometimes we have to set rules, we can still be accommodating in certain areas in order to make that person the most successful because that's what our job is, right? Our goal as a business person is to make that person more successful. Um, we also want to clearly define what our expectations are. And if they have something that they think differently on, then we need to ask them, please let me know and let's discuss this. So being willing to have those conversations and expectations, clearly defining the roles, the rules, and the procedures. stating what we think is obvious. So often we are walking forward and we don't know how to proceed because we think that somebody already has this understanding, that they
Yeah.
understand our expectation, that they understand what we want from them and what we think that the parameters are. So we have to
Mhm.
stop doing that and we have to clarify and we have to state the obvious. We have to encourage active participation. We have to ask the other person's opinion. Again, ask and listen are two of the biggest things, and clarify what you think is their answer. I had a issue earlier in the week with because it was my fault. I jumped to conclusions about what the person meant, and that wasn't what they meant at all.
Ah,
So make sure that you clarify. Are you asking because? Why are you asking? Would you please tell me a little bit more about what you mean by that?
yes.
Because if we don't know what's going on in their head and we think from our perception, oh, that's what they're thinking, and that's not what we're thinking at all, you're going to start having friction. But if we're willing to say, okay, would you clarify that for me? Let me make sure I've got this correctly and reiterate back to them what you're thinking that they're saying, and we can start creating that communication.
Sounds great. And I like the tips you touched on, because it is sometimes so easy for people to say to coworkers, you need to be collaborating and you need to be listening to each other. But in terms of management in particular, Deborah, now more than ever, managers are also leading their teams remotely.
Hmm.
So, in terms of some of the cultural communication aspects that we're talking about, I mean, I know some of the tips you gave would have touched on leaders, but if you had any specific tips for people who are leading teams, what would some of those tips be?
My first tip would be to make sure that you are putting yourself in the other person's shoes. Yes, you do have standards. Yes, it might not work if if that person does not follow your rules, but
Yeah.
understand where they're coming from. Understand, have empathy for them. Then set boundaries according to what you need to do in your business. Let them know if something's not going to work. Let them know if there's a way you can accommodate them. I would also say that if you're the lead, make sure that discipline, consequences, anything like that is stated clearly up front. Let people know what your expectations are. Don't expect them to just know
Yeah.
what you want
Yes.
them to do. Tell them what the acceptable breaks are. If their child suddenly is having a temper tantrum in the middle of them trying to work, what are they supposed to do? Give them some parameters on what your expectations are. And
Yeah.
again, give grace as much as possible. Give grace, especially during this time. And just know that most people have good intentions. It's not the intention that's bad, it's the way that people are interpreting what is a good intention and what is a bad intention.
Ah, that's great. And so, just from what you've said as well, Deborah, I've seen we're more and more in the remote space and people rushing to move online. There has been quite an emphasis on the systems. Like, people have been focusing on the technologies. They've been rushing their IT person to ensure that the system works and people can access the office. People who are consultants and freelancers, etc., they're more ramping up their internet access, ensuring that they have a good laptop, ensuring they have a good phone. But
Yeah,
what I haven't seen lots of conversations about are really updating your communication systems and policies.
right.
And so now, with what is happening, what are your thoughts on that in terms of what is it that organizations, freelancers, consultants probably need to be considering now more than ever in terms of their communication cycles and interacting with others within this remote space?
Absolutely. I have heard it said that some of us will not go back to buildings. There's some certain predictions that they're making that some people will find that it's much more effective for the company to have people work from home as long as they can get the work done. So I think accountability is going to be one of the big things. I think telling people what are they accountable for. I think that a company switching from building and everybody working together is going to have to examine their why. Why, why do we want people to do this? What are we expecting people to do? What is the outcome that we want to achieve from this? We cannot simply continue with business as usual. We have to be willing to step out and say, okay, what worked in that environment and didn't work in that environment that will or will not work in this new remote environment. We have to examine our human resources policies. And
Yes.
a lot of things that we talked about in human resources before are no longer going to be applicable in this system because you have your family in the same environment with you. Yes, it would be ideal if everybody had an office to go to where they could shut the door, but that doesn't happen in every family. So we have to figure out what's acceptable. We have to give some leniency as to whether your kid can show up in the background and someone gets offended by that, or whether
Yes.
you're going to give grace and say, okay, we're all in this together. So, what is the policy? What is acceptable? What is not acceptable? And to make our new guidelines very clear again as to what are your expectations. We really need to think about all those arbitrary rules that we have in place that
Yes.
really, why did we have that rule? You know, somebody, it was to solve a particular issue that was taking place in a very short period of time. There might have been all these workers were all going off together, taking a break together. And so we have this rule now that only one person can take a break every 15 minutes. And so often when we create rules like that, rule was created 10 years ago. And if I
Yes.
ask the managers and even the owner of the company, why do you have this rule? They may not be able to tell me because
Remember.
the rule was made to handle a situation that was 10 years ago. So companies
Yes.
have to start examining their rules. They have to say, okay, does this rule work with remote work and remote life? What do I most want my employee to accomplish? What is the most important thing that people can do during this period of time? How are they going to be most effective? What does effectiveness look like
Okay.
in this situation?
Great. That's awesome, Deborah. And so, and speaking to some people out there, or even from our chats throughout this week, there have been people who have said what they have been feeling the most is anxiety. For people who are still within a workplace, they're feeling added pressure and anxiety because their superiors would have been saying, okay, you're now home. And
Yes.
so you would have had a 9 to 5 arrangement, and they say they feel like they're now so tied to their laptop. They're always being required to do something. So when you mentioned in terms of updating those policies as well, I thought about things like the break times that people are entitled to and the stretches and stuff that they may need and that sort of stuff. But I wanted to just briefly touch on balance within this space with all that's happening. You talk a lot about culture, you talk a lot about value, you talk a lot about having a kind of sense of meaning in your life. So just wanted to talk a little bit about achieving a sense of balance, especially with all that's happening and how much people now feel forced to be glued in front of their digital devices at this time.
And absolutely, and that's something that I personally am learning as we go because I
Yes.
tend to be a workaholic. And I can, now that I don't have any other obligations of going outside the house or attending other meetings, I can just sit and stay on my computer all day long.
Yeah.
And my son or my family members who'd like to have a conversation with me are um, missing out if I continue to do that. So, more importantly than ever, for our mental health, for our ability to cope, for our being able to focus on the positive, we have to start asking. And that is so contradictory to what some of us believe. But we have to say, I'm sorry, I need a 15-minute break in between here. And you don't have to say, I'm sorry. That is not truly inappropriate, but you have to say, I am going to take a 15-minute break. I need to take care of this. I will be back. I promise I will get this work done. And we need to re examine. what work looks like in some industries. Um, what it, what are we supposed to accomplish in a day? Are we supposed to be on the computer 12 hours because that's what the shift was there? Well, you can be more effective sometimes when you're not having all the distractions
Yes.
of having to talk to other people and having to go deal with a problem or having to deal this, or we can be less productive on the same thing because we're dealing with the problem of our kids
Yes.
while we're trying to finish a meeting. So we have to be willing to speak up for ourselves in a way
Yes.
that we never have before. And we have to be willing to create boundaries for ourselves and what is appropriate, as well as for other people, and say, I'm sorry, this is family time. That was one of the things I actually had because some cultures are more family oriented, some are more work oriented.
Yeah.
And we have to say, this is important to me and my family, and therefore I'm going to take a stand. And I know that's hard for some people to do, and I know that finances come into play and you're worried about being fired, but at some point we have to be willing to take a chance and work. I don't mean be demanding. That's not what I'm saying at all. I am saying gracefully, with patience, connect with the person. They're in the same situation you are. There's been no better time than this to start making those changes because they understand what you're going through more than any time ever before.
Okay,
Does that make
sounds good.
sense? And I know you have more to add to that, so please add to that.
Well, I'm just saying that, just as you mentioned before, that it's just the importance of having a conversation now.
Mhm.
And it's sad, but I'm hoping that interviews such as this that we're doing can force human resources, if it's an entrepreneur who's running a business model, if it is the head of the organization, it's an opportunity now for these persons, these stakeholders to look at the change in times, the different dynamics that people are dealing with, and what it means in terms of productivity. So for your staff member that was normally more productive in your office and they're now forced with being at home, it may be a very different case in terms of productive hours as well. So it's about having some levels of flexibility. I mean, we spoke to one mom who works from home with a young child, and she was saying, of course, she tries as best as possible to schedule her meetings around when her daughter is at the most active. But there are times when the child will be screaming in her background. She says there are times where she have had to apologize to say, go ahead with the meeting. She's fine. She's not dying. She's just having a tantrum. But there are other times when she has had to pause and quickly go and tend to her child's needs and to deal with that. So, it's about, as you said, being emphatic and kind of being sensitive to the challenges that we're all experiencing at this particular time and having those conversations really. So I'm just
I
echoing lots of the sentiments you've been sharing, that now is the time for people to be sensitive from a cultural perspective, not just from a country by country culture, but even within your own organization, the backgrounds your staff are working with. Not that everyone has a separate room that they can go into and close the door for a meeting. And so now is the time for human resource personnel, heads of companies, managers, etc., to start having those conversations with their staff members about what may be most feasible at this particular time.
The other thing I had to add to that was that employers need to begin to understand that quality downtime, quality personal time, quality family time, taking that break actually improves work instead of the long periods of dragging out 12 hours. Working in 45-minute shifts and taking 15-minute breaks, doing those kinds of things, shifting what we think of as what is best practice on being
Yes.
effective, because there are things that can definitely improve productivity. And so often we're going back to rules that were made in the 50s and 60s and maybe 70s of what productivity looks like. And we have to start thinking, well, what's productive with the current culture? How do we be the most productive in today's environment? And that is not always working 12 hours a day. So companies really need to take a look at those kinds of issues as well.
Awesome. And as you spoke, I just put this little pop up on the screen to be productive and not busy, because in
Exactly.
essence, that's what you were talking about. And so, wow, it's amazing that we have already gotten to almost an hour already.
Wow.
So it's already 52 minutes in. And so I wanted, any final thoughts you had, Deborah? I mean, for persons who are watching, if you have any questions, now is the time to get them in before we wrap. But if there are any other things you wanted to say to anyone who is watching about cultural considerations, we've been forced indoors, we've been forced online, it will affect how we go forward. What are some of the key cultural and communication considerations that organizations, individuals, entrepreneurs, whoever needs to be aware of going forward?
Just that we are all individuals and we've got to stop um, lumping people, oh, they are such and such race or such and such culture or such and such whatever, and assuming because someone looks like this, that this must be how they are. Assuming that somebody, because they're an engineer, must have this type of mindset. Assuming that somebody, because they have children in their home at that time, is not going to be productive. We have to stop generalizing everything and start looking at people as individuals. We have to be willing to deal in diversity and examine our own self limiting beliefs about other people. And we have to start being inclusive of making sure that we are bringing everybody's voice to the table because I love the story. I'm trying to think of the name of the book, but there was a story about a lady that was a CEO of a Hewlett Packard, I believe, and there was a gentleman before she was CEO in one of her departments, and that gentleman came to her one day, and he had never been productive, in her opinion. He
Mhm.
had never done a whole lot, and he said, "Well, those numbers don't add up." And she said, instead of, "Oh, well, you're wrong," or "Yes, they do," or "Show me," she said, "Well, tell me, what would you do different? How can I fix this?" And when she asked him for his participation, he became one of the best employees in her organization, wound up saving the company millions upon millions of dollars because she asked. She switched what he was doing to what was in his wheelhouse. She utilized the employee's best skills for how it worked within her company. She didn't say, "Gee, that's not the skill set that I was hoping for. You no longer work for my company." Instead, she said, "How can I utilize your skill set to improve my best company?" And so we really need to keep in mind what is it that that employee brings to the table? What have they been really good at? And how can I tweak that? We need to be aware of our change tolerance and start being willing to step into the new future.
Sounds great. And I like that you spoke a lot in terms of not making the assumptions, because the more and more we have seen in our industry, Deborah, is that people just automatically assume you're from a particular country, you have certain particular traits, and then they go through the typical stereotypical routines to say, this person from this country behaves this way, this person from this country behaves this way.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. But I think we're frozen. I cannot hear you. I don't know whether you can hear me.
Hearing me now?
I can hear you now. Yes.
Yes. So I'm saying that, as you and I know, is that there can be people from specific countries who fit none of the profiles of that country.
Yes.
Similarly, within an organization, you're aiming to build your organizational culture, but you have to acknowledge that people function differently in that space and to actually see it as a complement, as
Yes.
something to be leveraged. The diversity is worth leveraging positively and not something to shy away from. So I
Absolutely.
see a comment here. Well, T. Stevens, she was saying, appreciate the information. You answered the question I was typing earlier. Thanks for sharing. So that's good to know. All right. And so, Deborah, so for persons who would have been watching, just talk to us a little bit about, all of the things that you do, and where can they find Deborah in terms of, tell us a bit about your service offerings and where can people connect with you?
So my main goal right now during the middle of this pandemic is to offer people encouragement and to also help them through consulting and communication coaching or life coaching as to how to live your better life, how to live your best life, even in the middle of this. So I
Yeah.
have a series online that's a 30-day challenge. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on YouTube. You can find me on Facebook. And I have an Instagram called Deborah Love Bradshaw. And here's how you can remember that. Deborah was the only female warrior in the Bible. Um,
Hmm.
love, the world needs more love.
Nice.
Bradshaw, everybody knows Terry or Carrie. Terry is an American football player, and Carrie was on Sex and the City. So everybody
Oh,
knows Bradshaw. So Deborah Love Bradshaw. You can find me on social media, on Google, on a lot of different platforms. And if I can help in any way, please let me know. My goal is to remind you that you are valuable, that you have a purpose, and that you can do so much more than you ever thought possible. And I'm hoping that during this time, you will give yourself rest. You will enjoy the things that you have to be grateful for, your family, the food on your table, and that you will remember that this too shall pass and we'll be on to the next stage. And that in everything in my life, I can say that there's always been a gift if I was willing to receive it. And I believe that there is a gift even in this.
awesome. Such powerful words. And ladies and gentlemen, really very motivating. I remember even reading Deborah's profile. Someone said what they love about her is that she's a self starter and she's very self motivating. And I was really moved by just listening to these last words. So, again, if you want to connect with her, it's Deborah Love Bradshaw. I had it on the screen for a bit. I will just pop it up a bit more. And Deborah, I feel like we could have just spoken forever. I mean, I'm in the cultural communication space as well. So this is just like a very connected sort of thing. And so I definitely look forward to working with Deborah in the future. And I
Yeah,
thank you so much for being here,
thank you.
sharing not just about culture and communication and those considerations that companies, organizations, individuals, etc., need to be considering at a time like this, but also positive mindsets and positive manifestations that people can be using as we go through this pandemic. So thank you ever so much. Ladies and gentlemen, again, if you want to reach out to Deborah, just look for Deborah Love Bradshaw. She's an author. She has a website. She's across all major social media platforms. And she's now doing a challenge on cultivating an attitude of gratitude. Is it, Deborah?
Um, it's called 30 Days to Baby Stepping Your Way to a Better Life, even in the middle of a crisis.
In the middle of a crisis. Thank you so much. So there you have it, everyone. Thank you so much again for tuning in to yet another session of That Remote Life. This is where we have pulled together different remote life strategies talking about diverse topics to help people who are thrown into the space and to look at the different ways in which they can navigate the difficulties that comes with this. This interview with Deborah goes live shortly. It will be on the channel. You can go and check that out. Feel free to share it with anyone who you think it could be of value for. And again, if you have any questions, you can leave them in the comments section, and I'm sure Deborah would be happy to pop by and
Yes.
to respond to them. Janelle Foster says, thanks for the sessions. So thank you again, everyone, for tuning in, and do have a great life, a great night. And remember that you can always check back ever so often to look at the varied tips we've given throughout this week in terms of how to have some balance with this remote life. Right. Okay, so thank you, everyone, and bye bye.
Bye.